In the Reading Corner today, I'm very pleased to be welcoming Elen Caldecott. Elen is a writer for children and young people. Her debut novel with the intriguing title How Kirsty Jenkins Stole the Elephant was published in 2009. Further novels followed: How Ali Ferguson Saved Houdini, Operation Eiffel Tower, The Mystery of Wickworth Manor, The Great Ice Cream Heist, and these were followed by a series of stories about a group of friends called the Marsh Road Mysteries. Elen's work is characterised by mystery, an adventurous spirit, and a warm, honest depiction, quite often of non-traditional families, where the word family is open to new interpretations. Once a graduate of the Bath Spa MA in writing for young people, Elen is now Associate Lecturer on the course. Her current PhD, through practice, is funded with support from the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And I quote here where it says she's interested in the opportunities of transnational and transcultural writing, which I think is evidenced in her forthcoming novel, The Short Knife. Welcome, Elen.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
And I think maybe we need to start by thinking about the connections between your PhD and this novel. I'm assuming that they're integrated and very closely related.
Yeah, absolutely. So the PhD, which I've completed now, The Short Knife made up 80% of my submission, and then I wrote another contextualizing piece. So the point of that contextualizing piece was to make explicit some of the knowledge that is implicit in the novel itself. So yeah, the novel and the PhD research were one and the same, actually.
Fantastic. I actually feel that I need to read the supporting piece as well. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit later as we delve deeper into the novel. Mm-hmm. But to start, could you set the story up for us?
Sure. So it's set in the 5th century in Britain, which was a really tumultuous time, the end of the Roman Empire and the collapse of civic society, and the arrival, I don't want to use a more contentious word, the arrival of Anglo-Saxons into the British Isles. And in the novel we meet a girl who considers herself Romano-British, and she meets Saxons for the first time and tries to negotiate a place for herself as a girl, as a British girl, when the society around her has got really no place for somebody like that to be safe.
And it's set in the years AD 454 to 455. Mm-hmm. Was there anything specific about those years in particular, or was this just a date plucked from that period?
It's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. I wanted the collapse of Rome to be done. So that kind of formally happened in the way that we can know anything about a time with so little documentary evidence. That happened in 410, and so I wanted the girls to be growing up completely detached from Rome. They've never been there, they've never met any true Romans in inverted commas, but I wanted the generation above them to still have that memory of what we once were. And so it was important for me for there to be a generational divide between the girls meeting the Saxons and then the adults in her family and the adults around her, their relationship with the newcomers. So it's a slightly arbitrary date, but set in a period where 2 generations would have had very different experiences of British history.
Mm. And we obviously learn so much through your narrator. Well, we learned everything through your narrator, May. She's responsible for us coming to understand the setting, the culture, the language. She has a very unique voice. Mm-hmm. How did you go about finding that voice?
It was quite a difficult task. So the reason that this piece it became a PhD was because I knew that I wanted the voice to be doing something quite complicated, and I knew that it would take me time, and the amount of time that you get to write a book if it's for an academic project was much more practical for what I wanted to do. So I spent the first year just trying to find and create a voice for her. The way that she speaks is based on contemporary Welsh, because though she's Romano-British, she comes from the western side of the country, which was a little bit less influenced by Latin. So she speaks a kind of an version of Old Welsh. And so I wanted to try and create that somehow. So I took contemporary Welsh and I used as much as I could possibly squeeze into the English of the book. So the book is written in English. People who speak English can read it without any problem whatsoever. But there is an element that, well, in fact, there's quite a few different elements taken from the Welsh language and kind of made to wear the clothes of English, if you see what I mean. So the bones are in some ways Welsh. And that took a really long time. I knew that that's what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. So that's why it took me a year of just writing and writing and writing and thinking, well, what if I tried this? What if I tried that? And all kinds of things ended up filtering through and being the right artistic choice, and loads of things got thrown away. So I did try using Welsh phonemes, I considered for a while, and phonemes and graphemes, and it was unreadable. And I tried using a lot more Welsh vocabulary to begin with. So yeah, it took a while.
So are you a Welsh speaker, Ellen?
Yeah, I grew up in North Wales and my family are bilingual, and I grew up bilingual as well.
How much record do we have of this older Welsh, or is it an artistic creation?
It's an artistic creation. So Old Welsh, you know, there are people in university settings who study and read Old Welsh, just in the same way that there are people who study and read Old English. But it's not Welsh is an evolving language in just the same way as English is. So I am not trying to recreate Old Welsh. That was a step too far for the amount of time and brain space and talent that I had. So it's using contemporary Welsh as an avatar, really, for the fact that, you know, so much of the British Isles was more Welsh speaking at one point, or at least, you know, a version of Celtic languages were much more widely spoken than they are now.
Absolutely fascinating. I think maybe it would be good to get a sense of that. And I know that you said that you would read a little bit for us. This comes from fairly early on in the novel, doesn't it?
Yeah, pretty much at the beginning, where we meet Mai and her sister Harv, and Tad is the Welsh name for dad. So you might need to know that Tad means dad. Trouble came with the frosts of dying autumn. Our farm lay too close to the road, Harv said. It brought naught but worry. Our father was different. Tad had been born in better times, when this land was ruled by far-off emperors. He remembered the tramping march of men, the Roman army plumed under eagles. He was full of stories of adventure and glory and great men and gods born in stables. Tad was up on the top field when the danger arrived. 3 men. Only me and Rat Cat were there to watch them walk. I don't know where Harv had got to that day. Outside in the hall in the farmyard, me and the cat stood and I saw. "Who's that cat?" I whispered. The men made raucous calls as they strolled Lingdy-long farmwards, swinging their walking sticks. "Are they friend or foe?" I asked Cat. As they got close, I saw there was no real need of the question. No travellers who walked with such rolling ease could be friendly. The beat of my blood quickened as they came closer. Should I leave the farm empty while I ran up the hill to fetch Tad, or stay, but let Tad delay untold? I was caught between the devil and his sty. They were near our yard now. They wore flapping layers of brown, like corpse bird feathers. Brown hair knotted and tangled atop nut-tanned skin. Mudmen, I thought, spawned in road ditches. "Bore da bach," The man who led them spoke the correct greeting, but accented strangely. The sound that should have rolled was flat as floodplains. He had clearly learned the phrase in thick-tongued adulthood, Saxon. I said nothing. The cat stalked away. I never saw her again.
Oh, and that really sets up this feeling of foreboding. And in fact, it is a novel in which there's a lot of tension and aggression. Anyway, lots to keep the plot moving and keep us excited. I was fascinated as well. You've talked about language, and it took you a year to get the voice right. I was fascinated by your historical detail, architecture, animals, food, plants, and it put me in mind of Geoffrey Treece, who once wrote about how a young reader had written to him to say that his inclusion of a wild rabbit in an early medieval novel was inaccurate because rabbits were brought to the UK, allegedly, by the Normans. How important is it to you to get those details right?
Pretty important, I think. I'm sure that there will be people sending me rabbit-based emails. I will have made mistakes, but I did spend a lot of time researching the details, and not just for accuracy's sake, but I think for the quality of the writing. It was important for me to try and experience as much of that world as I could. So, for example, I went to a place called Westow, that is a recreated Anglo-Saxon village. And I was there with my notebook and my camera, and I was trying to make sure that I wasn't introducing things that shouldn't be there and avoiding anachronisms and so on. But I think it was also inspirational in terms of the writing itself, to try and spend time emptying my mind of my current self and trying to imagine what it would have been like. And I'm not, I'm not saying that I have achieved it. I think it's impossible to put yourself in the mindset of people who are, 1,500 years ago. But it was really evocative for me to do that, and I'm really glad that I did.
I love that idea of it being, the research is there for the quality of the writing, not just for the accuracy. And certainly when I read the novel, there was just that through the digging of the foundations for the buildings, it just felt that you were present, and therefore I felt present when I was reading the novel as well.
Good.
May actually dreams of being a warrior, a little bit like her heroine, and I realise I've been getting my pronunciation of all these characters wrong, so you're going to correct me in a moment. The Romans called her Boudica. We used to call her Boadicea when we were at school, and the Welsh is
Byddig. I am not worried about how people read these names. There were some conversations that we had about whether to include a glossary or not, because there are names that are definitely very Welsh and very hard to even imagine how. So one of the characters is called Gwrtheyrn, and we had a conversation about whether I should change that and make it something a bit more Anglified. And then I realised I don't actually mind. It's written, and so any noise that comes into a reader's head is totally fine. It doesn't matter. It
didn't in any way interfere with my enjoyment of the story. But I am pleased to have heard you pronounce it, and I'll go away and practice. But in the meantime, I was going to say that she dreams of being this warrior, doesn't she? She's almost like a heroine for her. And she learns in a way through this story that she doesn't have to be that warrior to make a difference.
Yeah, the idea of the role of girls and women in any era is always really interesting. But in this era in particular, so few stories have been passed down to us. We know of so few women from this period, that it was really important for me to think about what different kinds of women and girls there might have been, and what their dreams are like. So I'm hoping that there's no sense of one kind of homogenous way of being a girl. There are there are 3 or 4 quite different characters in this piece, and I think that collectively they represent voices whose stories just haven't survived. And I wanted her to know about female warriors and to maybe dream of that, but actually I don't know how accessible it would have been for girls to become warriors. And we see that a lot in fantasy. You know, there are loads of female fantasy warrior women, and it doesn't feel like a realistic idea of what a person could have been in those times, or even in, you know, parallel fantasy universes that people create. I'm not entirely convinced by the warriorness always, and so I wanted her to have this dream, but actually come to negotiate her own reality a little bit more through what can a woman actually be, and what can a girl hope to achieve with her life.
And yet you do also seed the idea that it's possible for women to be leaders. So there's the possibility at some point of her sister taking on more of a leadership role.
Yeah, I mean, her sister's an interesting one. I had some trouble with Harv because she initially was a little bit more beguiling than she is now, and that she used her gender a little bit more in terms of manipulating the men around her, and I was a bit uncomfortable with that, and so I switched her a little bit to make her a bit more cunning, a bit more, you know, she's more of a chess player in the world, and she can predict what people will do, and that, you know, lends itself to her becoming a leader, and that possibility does open up for her, and I like to think that she did go on to lead a little bit more in her own right after this book's finished. I haven't written any further stories for them, but in my mind, Harv does well for herself in the future.
The men generally in the novel don't come off too well. Whether they are Romano-British or indeed Saxon, there's perhaps more similarity between them than there is difference.
Yeah.
And it's certainly a more brutal novel in many ways than anything else that you've written before. What was the experience of writing some of that like? Well,
I don't want to give away too much of the ending, but this story is inspired by a folk tale that I knew growing up. So some of the finale was a story that I was familiar with in my childhood, and Gutheuven that I mentioned earlier, there are kind of monuments to him in North Wales and little plaques about, you know, this is where he was meant to have lived and so on and so forth. So he's part of the storytelling tradition that I grew up with, and once you're kind of you've embraced a plot, then you can't deviate from it too much. So it is different to the writing that I've done before, but I think it's been a good challenge for me to take something quite traditional and to play with it a bit, and to modernize it, and for me to look at it from the perspective of people whose, you know, stories have not made it through the generations. So, you know, in that sense, it does share a bit of DNA with the writing that I've done before in terms of representation of perhaps communities that don't get represented as much.
If we could talk a little bit about the way in which it's written. It's a split narrative, and again, I'm just interested in how that came about in the process. As a reader, that split narrative creates a sense of mystery, and consequently it propels the plot forward, I think. Was it always going to be written like that, or was it an epiphanal moment, or did it just come through experimentation?
I wanted it to work like that because I knew what the finale was going to be. So it was always planned that way. I knew what the finale was going to be, and the finale, because it comes from this folk story, and the finale is very focused around the actions of the men, and just thinking in terms of structurally, I didn't want to end the book with the stories of the men playing out, you know, these people that had such an impact on but for whom she is nothing. You know, she doesn't really register in their stories, though their stories are very influential on hers. I didn't want to end with them and then give a short postscript to what happens afterwards, because if you think about, you know, our standard narrative structure, you have the grand finale and then you have the sort of the epilogue where you get to see what the, you know, what the new situation is like, and that epilogue just wasn't going to be long enough for me to continue to tell my story. So by doing a split narrative, I could do a before and after and still have the finale in the right place structurally, but almost cheat extra time, so that I could continue to tell the girl's story beyond that point.
Fascinating. You've written about, or I think it was in the description of your PhD, about the opportunities and tensions of transnational and transcultural writing. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about what you see those opportunities to be and what the tensions are.
Yes. Now there's a lot of that in my contextualizing essay, and I probably should pick some of that out to share, because there's a lot to say. So creatively, it's really great. I mean, that's the opportunity really, is that when I was creating Mai's Voice, I had so much creative resources to draw on that, you know, the few people had drawn on before. I mean, there have been other people who've used Welsh to inspire English, but not so many that it's something that we're very familiar with. So I did things like, I got a dictionary of idioms and I translated the dictionary, and I put all of the idioms into literal English. And so that meant that I had this database of imagery and you know, phrasing that once you've understood it and you've thought about it for a while, you go, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. But it's not necessarily something you would generate from, you know, from a cold starting position. So having this language to draw on gave me huge creative opportunities. And then the tensions are, you know, as so often is the case, come down to questions of ownership of culture. I had protracted and quite difficult conversations with various people actually, about who I was doing this for, whether it was right to be diluting. Was I diluting Welsh? Was it right to be diluting Welsh? So on and so forth. One of my supervisors said to me, you know, English and Welsh are in a battle so one-sided, one lot don't even know that they're fighting. So yeah, when you have something like that, and then there's this sense of, you know, I was given the language, my parents made a conscious decision to maintain the language in my generation. It was a gift, and yet here I was kind of taking it apart and playing with it and presenting it to a whole different community for whom it does not have the emotional and cultural and historical connections that the speakers of it have.
I just want to remind everybody that we're speaking here about the writing of books for young people, and it just goes to show how much consideration and thought goes into that process. I wondered the extent to which giving so much depth of thought can make a writer impotent and not want to write.
Yeah, I'm actually quite bad at thinking without a pen. I find it much easier to find out what I think about something until I have written it down and edited it and curated it a bit, and then I can look and think, oh yeah, that feels right now. I feel like I've understood it. So for me, writing and thinking are the same act in many ways.
And can you tell us a little bit about the relationship of writing these two pieces of work for your PhD? Did you complete the novel entirely before you started the kind of reflective process, or was it a diary that went along with the writing? And how did it actually support the writing of the novel?
It was very much a process that went hand in hand. I was doing both at the same time. So I always had 2 journals on the go. I ended up filling a great many more, but there were always 2 on the go at once. And one was kind of creative pieces. So I would take that notebook to places like Westow, to Cardiff, to the Iron Age village that's been recreated there. And that would be my notebook for sitting and just writing material for the novel itself. And then my second notebook was a place for more theoretical research and more reflection. So I was maintaining a diary all the time about how did I feel about the project, and the creative decisions, how did I come to them. And it also included the provocations in terms of its reception. I was reading other writers as well, because I was looking at how other bilingual writers have used their multiple languages creatively. What's that intersection looked like for other people in their writing. So the 2 notebooks were very much in use at the same time. And I was writing the essay in little chunks in just the same way as I was writing the novel in little chunks. And I've actually ended up writing, I think it had to be 20,000 words in the end, and I must have written easily 60,000 words, because I was writing these little chunks of thinking and reflecting and considering, and then ending up having to select from that to write the final piece.
I seriously do want to read that. It sounds absolutely amazing. The story, The Short Knife, has resonance, I think, for today. I mean, it reminds us that we are all immigrants in part, if not whole, in one way or another. Was that a consciousness that you had when you were writing, or is it just something that comes up that the reader recognises, if you like?
I was conscious of it. I was, I wrote this. I was in the act of writing whilst the Brexit vote, while the campaign was happening, and in the aftermath of that. I have long, growing up in Wales, the Welsh, I don't know if you know this, but the Welsh for English, it's Saesneg, which just means Saxon. It's the same, Saesneg, Saxon, they sound the same. And so I've grown up thinking of our, close neighbours as Saxons from Saxony. And I think that when we are called English, and of course I live in England now and perfectly happy with my association with England, but when you say English, it doesn't have that memory in it really anymore. We forget where the Angles were from, and English is, it's slightly detached itself from that meaning. So I have been aware of the waves of immigration that have come into the UK, and have become used to the idea that we all shuffle up a bit, we all make room, because that's the story of the countries that I have lived in here. So yes, it's very much at the forefront of my mind.
I'm just thinking, is that the same then as the Scottish Sassenach?
Yeah.
Same root?
Yeah, absolutely.
Learned something new today, and I love the history of language, and I didn't know that, so I'm happy.
Good.
We said earlier on that this is very different from anything that you've written before, but I do think for anybody that has read your other stories, that they will actually see some connections too. I wondered if you saw any continuations and connections in your own work.
I'm always really interested in certain themes that just recur. So, the friendships between girls, I think, is something important. I've often had kind of sisters or siblings who love each other, but don't always fit together all the time. And I think that as I said earlier, that idea of trying to tell stories that are quite positive and quite hopeful about people who might otherwise be a little bit more marginalized, has been a thread. I mean, these people are in no sense kind of working class, but that has been my motivation in the past. So I think if there was a 5th century working class, I'm still telling those children's stories.
I'm always interested to find out a little bit about the other people that were involved in the writing. I know it's very much an individual process, but in your acknowledgements, you acknowledge quite a lot of people, and I wondered how they had supported you through this process.
There are a lot of people, yeah. The main group, it kind of falls into 2 halves. So people who helped with the creation of the book, and they're often academics. So I thank all of my PhD supervisors who could not have been more instrumental in shaping this. They read early drafts. They talked to me about the difficulties. They talked to me about theories that I should read and other contextual writing. It wouldn't have happened without those people. And then the second half are people in publishing who have taken a risk on this book, because I don't think it's necessarily an easy sell. It's not, for example, set during a time that's studied on the curriculum. I think historical fiction that's directly connects with the curriculum has a much better chance. But the people at Anderson saw past all that and backed me. It's really great.
I would actually applaud anybody that publishes a historical book that doesn't connect with the curriculum. I know that when I was growing up, historical fiction was my go-to read, and the joy in that was actually meeting periods of history that you didn't study. So to actually only be presented with a limited palette of historical fiction, I think is incredibly frustrating. So it's great to have a book that doesn't directly connect with the curriculum. I'm interested to know now, having been through the whole process, you're now Dr. Elen Caldecott, are you?
I am, yes.
Yes, congratulations. So having done that, is this going to impact the way that you write in the future?
It has changed the way I write. I am writing something now which is much more, part of my writing DNA, in terms of I've returned to writing for a younger readership. It's more contemporary fiction. So The Short Knife was, for me, I had a really strong creative vision for what I wanted to do, and I couldn't see it work for anything other than what it became. And I don't know if I'm going to do anything like that again. So now I'm writing something that is much more, the sort of thing that I am used to doing. But the approach to that has changed. I'm hoping that my skill as a writer has deepened. I'm really hoping so, because it feels as if it has. So I am thinking about the themes in a much more strategic way. I'm thinking about what I want to say and how I want to say it with a bit more certainty than before. And I don't know if that's just because I'm a bit older now, but or whether it's the process of this reflection and thinking that I spent so long practicing. But it does feel different now, and it feels more skillful. I hope that's what I'm hoping.
Well, Dr. Elen Caldecott, thank you for joining us in the Reading Corner. Congratulations on the publication of this book, which is very shortly coming up. Thank you for the lesson in Welsh pronunciation. I promise I'm going away to practice. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you in the Reading Corner today.
It's been a joy to be here. Thank you ever so much for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to In the Reading Corner with Just Imagine. If you have enjoyed this podcast, you can find many more on the podcast section of our website, justimagine.co.uk, plus via iTunes or SoundCloud or your usual podcast provider. Don't forget to pass the pod and recommend this fantastic free resource to your friends and colleagues.